Coming up with a creative intro is way too hard. Here's Dragstrip. To begin, I'd like to say that's a pretty killer face sculpt. The visor's got a really interesting jagged shape with the teardrops going down his face. Do I know why it's there? Not at all. Do I care? Nope. I'm happy to see some originality with face sculpts considering how generic or boring they can be. As far as the rest of the head, I think the sculpting remains simple. As for the rest of the detailing on the head, I think it looks really good, and it remains complex enough to be cool, but not too simple to... As far as the rest of the head, I feel like the sculpting is complex enough to be cool, but not too detailed to the point where it's just boring. The coloring is really well done too, with not too much splotchiness for the red visor or the nice little light blue powder face. Personally, I would have preferred this shade of purple for his head like they did in the G1, but you know, whatever man, it's still a great face. Moving downwards, the torso is more of a mixed bag. I do like the little shiny Decepticon symbol, and I think it's genius how they managed to integrate this combiner peg, which could look really out of place and sort of just shoehorned in there, and I think they managed to make it fit with Dragstrip's aesthetic really well. That being said, the color of the combiner port is kind of bland and sort of Games Workshop-y gray, and also the screw holes are kind of annoying, but luckily it makes up for any problems it has with all the really nice yellow paneling detail around here. Before we move on to the legs, let's talk jitted. There is some definite back kibble here, but I can't really get annoyed at it because if it wasn't here, the figure would kind of be too skinny and not have enough bulk on it. So even though there is back kibble, I'm only going to give it a 4 out of 10 because, you know, it looks okay. Limbs! The arms and legs both have some sparse silver stuff sitting on their sides. Well, not quite their sides, more like their front. Anyway, the silver looks really nice, and I really wish that's the color they could have cast the combiner port in, because that would have made it look a lot better. The maroon paint and the maroon plastic don't quite match up, but you know, it's forgivable. The arms have a really strange sort of loose-fitting shirt motif with the really smooth sides and then the sort of hanging down wrist cuffs, I guess. Sadly, there's also a bit of hollowness on the inside of the arm, but there's some nice detail in there, so it kind of makes up for it. Overall, the arms are good, if a bit strange. The legs look alright, but I wish they could have transformed more. It's pretty obviously the bottom half of a car split in half, and the overall look kind of suffers for it. The bottom half split in half. Wouldn't that be a quarter? Articulation time! The shoulders both have a super unrestricted ball joint and a screw joint, so that lends itself to a lot of good motion. The elbows can bend in slightly more than 90 degrees, but unfortunately the wrists do not have a swivel, which, as we know, is a cardinal sin for a sword-wielding figure. The wrists can bend inwards due to transformation and also to help with certain sword-wielding poses, but I'll get back to that. The head's on a ball joint that's not quite limited, but it's still kind of restricted. There's a full waist swivel along with some ball joints and a swivel at the thigh. The knees can't quite go to 90 degrees, but you know, close enough. Finally, for certain walking poses, you can bend the ankles forward. Now let's move to accessories. First off, a complaint for all the Stunticons. I don't like how their primary weapons are all melee. I feel like they got the butt end of the deal, where the aerial bots got all these sweet, cool-looking G1 updated guns, and the Stunticons just got blunt instruments to beat people over the head with. Also, the attempt at making Dragstrip's sword a gun is kind of annoying because the peg is at a really stupid angle, meaning that if he wants to hold a gun, he has to bend his wrist inward to hold it. I don't know about you, but personally, I don't hold firearms like this. I know it's a stapler, just go with it. Aside from that, this thing is pretty good. Even though I would have appreciated some silver on the blade portion, the detail is still really, really nice. As for the other weapon, it's a gun. It's pretty obviously just the hand and foot part, and it doesn't work very well as a gun. Aside from how unconvincing it is, I can still appreciate this thing for the amount of engineering that had to go in it for all of its functions. Also, there's a collector's card, which looks absolutely nothing like the figure, but, you know, I think we're used to that by now. Overall, the accessories are passable, but I'm definitely going to pick up the Perfect Effect kit that upgrades the weapons and also gives articulated fingers. On to vehicle... Wait, obligatory size comparison. Ooh. This is the best kind of transformation. It's simple and satisfying and fun. Figures like Revenge of the Fallen, Jetfire, and Mixmaster are so over-complex and frustrating to transform, and then figures like Run Amok and Onslaught are so simple they barely have a passable second mode. Dragstrip doesn't suffer from any of these problems and manages to hide pretty much all of his robot parts. The only real problem with the transformation is that you end up with quite a few panel lines, but let's be honest. Who gives a crap about panel lines? The alt mode is near perfection too, with the only problem being the lack of ground clearance. I know drag racers are built for like aerodynamics or something, but rolling it around isn't fun, and it also risks scratching up some of the underbelly paint. Some hardcore G1ers complain that there aren't 6 wheels, and you know, I don't care. As for detailing, the car mode looks really slick. All the paint apps and plastic colors line up really nicely, but unfortunately we have the same problem where the shade of paint they use doesn't quite match up with the shade of plastic. The silver on the tires and up here looks really nice, but I wish they'd just use some more of it somewhere on the figure. Overall, it's a really sweet little drag racer. Weapon storage is definitely the least likable part of the figure. Because of the way the peg is positioned, when you try and plug it into the side, it just is at a really stupid angle. You could also have it straight out, but that looks just as stupid. As for the hand-foot gun, you can put it on top here, but why would you do that? I just leave them off. Now this is the part where I usually move on to final words and end the video, but this guy is a combiner limb, so we have 2 more modes to get to. Oh, and also obligatory size comparison. Since he's in car mode, let's go to leg mode first. Unfold the front of the car, spin it around, peg it onto the top of the car, then fold the head on top of it. Fold the bumper up so it's not longer than the other combiner legs. Unfold the little heel from the hand-foot gun, peg it into the bottom, and boom! You got a leg. Oh, and don't forget the combiner port. You could peg the sword into one of the sides, but why would you do that? Can't really say much about this thing, but can do this. So, yeah. Let's move on to arm mode. Pop the foot piece off, fold the combiner peg down, unpeg the arms, unpeg the legs, fold down the bumper, and here's where things get customizable. You can position the arms however you want, but I prefer to have them like this. And since Combiner Wars is Scramble City, you can either make him a left arm, left leg, right arm, or right leg. Turn the waist left for a right arm, or right for a left arm. I prefer turning it left for a right arm. Take the foot and you pop out the fingers. Hinge this assembly out till you can see the 5mm hole. Bend the thumb and position it appropriately. Peg it into place and bam! You got an arm. Since it's just a 5mm connection, you have a wrist swivel here. Dragstrip's waist and knees make for this guy's biceps and elbow. And you have some shoulder articulation. On a more minor note, he's got some finger articulation. Overall, this is a great arm mode. I ended up popping off the ball joints and tightening them just so he could hold heavier things, but even out of the box, it's still tight enough to hold any 5mm weapon. Speaking of holding weapons, instead of making it have to just grab it with the fingers and try and hold it in place, you actually just take the 5mm peg, put it into the port, and then you can pretend to wrap the fingers around it, which makes the connection a lot more stable than simply like the masterpiece grabbing the weapon. So what do I think? This thing is great. While the accessories are kind of lackluster and the paint is nothing to write home about, the rest of the figure is amazing. The engineering gets a perfect balance between kid-friendly and collector-friendly, where it's easy enough to transform for the kids so they can play with it and transform back and forth really fast, and it's still fun enough for a collector to pull off a shelf and tinker around with it for a little bit. I would highly recommend picking this guy up, and I cannot wait for the rest of the Stunticons. If this is the standard for all Combiner Wars Deluxes, I have high hopes for the future. Anyways, I have been Flame Pickle of the Pickle System, and hopefully you've been entertained. See ya. Remember not to actually microwave your toys.